The first time I noticed the smell, I was standing on my front porch, drinking my morning coffee. It was faint, barely noticeable beneath the crisp autumn air, but distinct enough to wrinkle my nose. Damp, musky, rotten. I glanced around, expecting to see a dead animal near the hedges, but there was nothing. The houses in my neighborhood were spaced far apart, separated by patches of dense trees. A quiet, peaceful place until now. The smell lingered, clinging to the inside of my nose, making my coffee taste sour. It wasn't until I left for work that it finally faded. I should have forgotten about it. But by the time I came home that evening, the stench had gotten worse. I parked in my driveway, stepping out with a grimace. The air was thick with the odor now, heavier than before. It smelled like old, damp wood, left to rot in the rain, except it hadn't rained in days. I hesitated before walking toward my house. The smell wasn't coming from inside. It was coming from somewhere behind the property. The woods. A wall of trees loomed at the edge of my backyard, black silhouettes against the setting sun. I never paid much attention to them before. They'd always just been there, a natural border at the end of my property. But now, something felt off. The trees looked wrong. Too still. Too dark. Like they were waiting for something. I shook the feeling off, telling myself I was just tired, and headed inside. But as I locked the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, I dreamed of wood. Not whole pieces, rotting wood. Black, damp, falling apart at the slightest touch. The air was thick with decay, making my throat itch. In my dream, I was walking through a house. Not my house. Somewhere old. Forgotten. The walls were bloated with moisture, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. A long hallway stretched ahead of me, the darkness at the end swallowing everything whole. And then a voice, soft, whispering, "It's still here." I turned. The dream shifted. I was standing in the middle of my backyard, staring at the woods. But there was something new there. A structure, barely visible in the darkness. A house. A house that shouldn't be there. I stepped forward and woke up. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. It was just a dream. But as I caught my breath, the faintest trace of something rotten reached my nose. And it was coming from inside the house. I scrambled out of bed, flipping the light switch. The room lit up, nothing out of place. But the smell. It was stronger now, like wet, decaying wood. I checked the walls, the floorboards, even the attic, nothing. No leaks, no mold, no signs of rot. But the air was thick with it, the scent making my stomach turn. That's when I noticed something outside my window. Movement. A flicker of something pale between the trees. I froze. Was someone out there? I crept toward the glass, heart hammering. The backyard was dark, but the faint glow of the porch light illuminated the first few feet of the woods. And that's when I saw it. A house. A house that had never been there before. I didn't sleep that night. The house in the woods was impossible. I lived here for 5 years. I knew my surroundings. There had never been a structure back there. But now, as I stood on my porch at dawn, staring into the trees, it was still there. Old, crooked, leaning like it could collapse at any moment. The stench was worse now, a foul mixture of damp rot, and something else, something that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. I shouldn't go near it. I knew that. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, go inside, forget I'd ever seen it. But I couldn't. Something about it drew me in, like it was waiting for me. I stepped off the porch, walked across the yard. The closer I got, the stronger the smell became. By the time I reached the edge of the woods, it was unbearable. My stomach lurched while rising in my throat. But I pressed on. The trees swallowed me, the sunlight dimming as I moved deeper into the forest. And then I was standing in front of it. The house. The wood was black with moisture, the walls sagging inward. The door hung slightly ajar, revealing only darkness inside. It looked ancient, like it had been here for centuries. But I knew that wasn't possible. It hadn't been here yesterday. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to step closer. My fingers brushed the wood, and I heard it breathe. A slow, wheezing exhale, like the house itself was alive. I stumbled back, heart hammering, and then a whisper, "Come inside." I turned and ran. I didn't stop running until I was back inside my house, the door locked behind me. My lungs burned, my hands shook, but I was safe. Or so I thought, because as I caught my breath, I noticed something on my fingers. Something dark, something wet. I lifted my hand, dread curling in my stomach. It was black, thick, seeping into the lines of my skin. Not mud, not dirt, rotting wood, and it was still wet, as if the house had touched me back. I scrubbed my hands until they were raw, but the feeling didn't go away. The sense that something had followed me home. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart racing at every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the house settling. And then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., the smell returned, stronger than ever. It filled the room, choking the air, sinking into my skin. And then a sound, a slow, wet creak coming from the closet. The smell was suffocating, thick, damp, wrong. I lay frozen in bed, every nerve in my body screaming at me to move, to do something. But I couldn't. I could only listen. The slow, wet creak of the closet door shifting in the dark. The weight of something there. Watching. Waiting. I swallowed hard, forcing my breath to slow. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe the smell, the dream, the impossible house in the woods had all gotten to my head. It's just the house settling. Just the wind. But I knew better. I could feel it. Something inside the closet. I forced myself to move, inching my hand toward my bedside lamp. The moment my fingers brushed the switch, the creaking stopped. Silence. Thick, suffocating. I hesitated, and then a whisper, soft, breathless, right next to my ear. "Come back." I lunged for the lamp, flooding the room with light. Nothing. The closet door was closed. My room was empty, but the stench, it was stronger than ever. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I checked the time. 3:12 a.m. The same time I'd smelled it the night before. I didn't sleep after that. I kept the lights on, my back against the headboard, eyes fixed on the closet door. But nothing else happened. Not until I checked the closet in the morning. The first thing I noticed when I opened the door was the floor. The wood inside my closet had always been normal, smooth, polished, the same as the rest of the house. But now, it was black, swollen, rotten, a perfect square of decayed wood, right in the center of my closet. The same kind of wood the house in the woods was made of. I stepped back, my heart pounding. I had scrubbed my hands raw the night before, trying to wash off whatever had gotten on me after touching that house. Had I brought something back? I didn't know what to do. I just knew I needed to get out. I spent the day at work trying to distract myself, but it didn't help. My thoughts kept drifting back to my closet, to the impossible decay spreading inside my house, to the voice that had whispered in the dark. I wasn't crazy. I knew what I'd heard. and I had a feeling it wasn't over. By the time I got home that evening, I was exhausted. But as soon as I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air was thick, heavy, and the smell, it was everywhere. Not just in my room. The whole house smelled like rotting wood. My stomach twisted as I moved from room to room, checking every corner. The smell was strongest near the closet, but now it was creeping into the hallway, seeping into the walls. And then I heard it, a sound I couldn't explain, a faint, wet scraping, like something dragging across wood. But it wasn't coming from inside my house. It was coming from the woods, from the direction of that house. I moved to the back window, my hands clammy as I peered outside. The trees were still. The yard was empty, but deep in the woods, barely visible in the dying light, the crooked house was closer. My breath hitched. It hadn't moved. It was closer to my house. That was impossible. Things don't just move on their own. But it had, and I had a feeling it wasn't done. I locked every door, every window. I didn't care if I sounded crazy. I needed to be sure nothing could get in. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was already too late. By midnight, the smell was so bad I could taste it. It was in my clothes, my skin, my lungs. And then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., the scratching started again. Closer, right outside my bedroom window. I didn't want to look. I couldn't look, but I did. And I wished I hadn't. Something was standing there. A figure, just barely visible beyond the glass. Its shape was wrong, elongated like it had been stretched too thin. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its fingers longer than they should be. But the worst part, its skin. It was rotting, splitting apart like wet, decayed wood. And it was smiling, not with a mouth, with its eyes, wide, empty, black pits fixed directly on me. I stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp. The bulb shattered. The room plunged into darkness. I scrambled for my phone, turning on the flashlight, and when I looked back, the figure was inside the room. I don't remember what happened after that. I woke up on the floor, my body stiff, my skin cold. The room was silent, the air thick, and the smell, it was stronger than ever. But the worst part? The closet door was open, and the rotten wood inside had spread. I couldn't explain what had happened. I couldn't explain the decay, or the thing outside my window, or the stench that now clung to my skin like a second layer. Every moment since I first set foot in that house had felt like it was leading me towards something terrible. And I was helpless, caught in its pull. The day after the incident, I called in sick to work. I had no real reason other than I was afraid to leave the house. Every creak, every whisper felt like the walls themselves were closing in around me. But I couldn't just sit there. I had to figure out what was happening. I needed answers. I spent hours searching online, trying to find anything about the house, about the strange decay, about the entity. But there was nothing that made sense. A house that moved, a rotting presence that never seemed to leave. But then, deep in a message board thread, I found a post. It was from a few years ago. The user had written about a house just like mine in the same region. A house with a history. The story went like this. Years ago, a family had lived in the house in the woods. A small, secluded family. One that nobody in the surrounding town really knew. But there were rumors. Whispers about strange occurrences, about the smell of rotting wood that would sometimes emanate from the house, even in the heat of summer. They said the family's youngest child had gone missing, vanished without a trace. The father had gone mad shortly after, claiming he'd seen his daughter's face in the window, her eyes hollow and black. A few months after that, the entire family had disappeared. No bodies were ever found. The house had been abandoned after that. But the rumors persisted. They said the place wasn't just abandoned. It was empty in a way that felt wrong, like something had been taken, something that shouldn't have been. I stared at the post, my pulse racing. This couldn't be real. But as I sat there, the walls of my house groaning under the weight of silence, I knew it was. Something in me clicked. I couldn't just stay in my house, trapped by the stench and the growing dread. I needed to see the house for myself. I needed to understand what was happening. That night, I drove out to the woods. I told myself it was a bad idea. I should stay home. But I couldn't. I had to see the house. The closer I got, the more I felt like the forest was closing in. The trees twisted above me, dark and oppressive, blocking out most of the moonlight. And then, through the trees, I saw it. The house. But it was different now. Where I had seen a crooked, decaying structure before, now I saw something far worse. It was moving. It was shifting, breathing, almost alive in a way that made my skin crawl. I stopped the car a few hundred yards away, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I felt an overwhelming urge to turn around, to drive away, and never look back. But I couldn't. I was already too far gone. I left the car behind and crept closer, my feet crunching on the leaves as I made my way through the woods. The stench at me first. It wasn't just the smell of rotting wood anymore. It was death. The kind of death that clung to your clothes, to your hair, to your very breath. It was suffocating, like it was trying to get inside of me. I fought the urge to gag, but I couldn't ignore it. The air felt thick, almost like I was swimming through it, and the ground beneath me felt soft, unstable. It was like the earth itself was decaying. And then I saw it. The house, standing there like a dark sentinel, watching me. There were no lights inside, no movement, but I could feel it. The thing inside, the presence. I knew it was watching me, even though I couldn't see anything in the windows. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at the house. I couldn't move. My body felt frozen, caught in a web of fear I couldn't escape. Finally, I forced myself to step forward. Every step felt wrong, like I was violating some unseen boundary. But I couldn't stop. I needed to know what was inside. As I approached the front door, I noticed something. The porch, the steps leading up to the entrance, wasn't as I had remembered it. The wood had rotted. Not just decayed, but completely eaten away, as if something had been gnawing at it, clawing at it for years. And when I stepped on the first step, I felt it sink under my weight, the soft, wet wood giving way like it was already dead. I reached out, hand trembling, and grabbed the door handle. It was cold, too cold. With a slow, deliberate motion, I turned the knob. The door creaked open, and that's when I heard it. A sound, faint at first, but growing louder with every passing second. A soft, muffled humming. It was coming from inside the house. I froze, my hand still on the door. The humming was low, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The kind of sound that felt wrong, like it was meant to unsettle you, to get under your skin. It was soothing, but in a way that made every hair on the back of my neck stand up. I knew that song. I had heard it before in the dead of night. I didn't want to go in. I didn't want to find out what was making the sound. But I had no choice. I stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind me. Inside, the house was empty, bare, save for the rotting wood that lined the walls and the floor. The ceiling sagged in places, and the windows were covered with grime, casting everything in shadow. The stench of decay was unbearable now. It clung to my clothes, my hair, my skin. It was like I was breathing it in, and it was sinking into me. But the humming, it was louder now, and it was coming from upstairs. I didn't know what to do. I had to go up. I had to find out where it was coming from. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking beneath me, the wood threatening to give way with every movement. The higher I went, the more the humming seemed to grow in volume, until it was a constant, vibrating buzz in the back of my skull. When I reached the top, I saw the door at the end of the hallway. It was cracked open. I had to go through it. As I moved closer, I felt it a shift. Something was different. Something was waiting for me. And as I pushed open the door, I saw it. The thing. The entity that had been lurking, waiting. The thing that had followed me all this way. It was smiling. Its eyes were dark and hollow, the wood of its body rotting, decaying, as if it were made of the same stuff as the house. And it knew me. It knew who I was. It had always known. And as I opened my mouth to scream, it whispered the same words. Come back. The moment the whisper escaped the entity's rotting lips, my blood turned to ice. Time seemed to stretch in a way that felt wrong, like the air itself had thickened, pressing in on me. I should have run. I should have screamed and bolted for the door, but my feet wouldn't move. The stench of decay flooded my senses, drowning out everything else until I could barely breathe. The thing in front of me stood like a dark silhouette in the dim, oppressive light. Its form was indistinct, blurred, twisted, but I could feel it, feel the weight of its presence pushing down on me. Its hollow, dark eyes burned through me, not with the usual malevolent intent I'd expect from something of its nature, but with something far worse. It knew me. And the worst part was, I didn't know how. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, frozen, locked in the entity's gaze. Seconds? Minutes? Hours? I could feel the walls of the house shift around me, as if it, too, was alive, watching me, responding to the strange exchange. It was the house that was the true predator here, not just the creature that existed within it. Then the door slammed shut behind me with a force that rattled the floor beneath my feet. I didn't need to look to know that it had locked itself. My mind raced, desperately trying to formulate a plan of escape, but I couldn't move, couldn't think beyond the hum that reverberated through my bones. The humming sound, I realized now, wasn't just coming from one part of the house. It was everywhere. It was the foundation itself, vibrating with an eerie, low-pitched noise that made my teeth ache. My head pounded in time with it, and as I pressed my hands to my ears to block it out, I felt the pressure increase like it was closing in on me from all directions. In a panic, I turned to face the hallway, desperately trying to find an exit, but the dark, decaying walls closed in, and the hallway stretched on longer than I thought was possible. It was like the house was shifting itself, changing its dimensions to trap me. I stumbled forward, walking down the hallway, each step feeling like it took me deeper into some kind of labyrinth. I passed rooms with open doors, but none of them felt right. The rooms were empty. Empty except for the decay. For a fleeting moment, I caught a glimpse of something, an imprint on the walls, a shadow that moved too quickly to be human, and I realized with a jolt that the house wasn't empty, it was alive. I ran faster, the urgency rising inside me. I couldn't breathe properly anymore. The air was thick, stale, saturated with that ever-present rot. The walls seemed to close in tighter with each step. The floorboards beneath me groaned in protest. But I couldn't stop, couldn't look back. The entity was still there. I knew that now. It was watching me, feeling me struggle. It was aware of every movement, every sound. But it wasn't attacking. It was just there, waiting. Its presence was like a weight on my chest, pulling me down with every breath. It didn't need a rush. It knew I would come to it eventually. I pushed myself harder, reaching the stairs and running down them in a desperate attempt to escape. But the stairs felt different now. Warped, soft. The wood beneath me buckled with every footstep, as if it were unable to hold my weight. The house itself was shifting in real time, the wood bending and snapping like it was a living organism. And then, in the silence, I heard the humming again. It was louder now, more distinct, as though it was coming from the walls themselves, the very foundation of the house. With dread curling in my stomach, I realized I wasn't just hearing it. I was feeling it. It was moving through me. It was inside my body, vibrating every cell in my bones, urging me to listen. I stopped, feeling a heavy weight in my chest as the humming swelled. It was familiar now, no longer just an eerie background noise. It was calling to me. And in my panic, I realized something horrifying. I recognized the tune. It was the same melody I'd heard that night when I first moved into the house, the night I had been woken by something or someone humming in the dark. A cold chill ran through me. The melody had been waiting for me. It wasn't a coincidence. It had been a warning, and I had ignored it. I froze, paralyzed by the thought. But before I could even react, the air seemed to warp, bending unnaturally. The humming grew louder and more intense, vibrating the walls with a force I could feel in my chest. It was coming from all directions now. I turned to look toward the stairs, and there, at the bottom, stood a figure. A woman. Her skin was pale, nearly translucent, and her eyes, hollow and dark, stared directly at me. Her mouth moved, and the humming grew in pitch, filling every inch of the room. I could see her lips moving, but no sound came from her. The woman's hands were outstretched toward me, but they were wrong. Her fingers were long and gnarled, the nails jagged like broken glass. Her arms stretched unnaturally, as if the house itself was pulling her toward me. And then I saw the other detail, the most disturbing of all. Her feet weren't touching the ground. She was hovering. The house was lifting her, drawing her closer, and as she neared, the smell of rot, the unmistakable, suffocating stench, flooded my nostrils. It was the smell of wood that had been too long in the ground. Of decay. With a final, horrible lurch, the woman was right in front of me, her face now mere inches from mine. Her breath was hot against my skin, but her eyes, they never left mine. And as the humming intensified, louder than ever before, she whispered, just barely audible over the sound, "You're too late." I didn't have time to react. The house shook violently, and the woman was gone, vanishing into the walls like she had never existed. The lights flickered in and out, and the air was thick with the oppressive stench of rot. But something else was different. Something had changed. The walls groaned, and I felt a sudden shift beneath my feet. The house was no longer just alive, it was moving. The wood was shifting, bending, warping with unnatural force. I could hear the floors bending beneath me, and the walls seemed to be closing in on me. The house was alive, and it was no longer content to wait. It was trying to trap me forever. The house was alive. There was no mistaking it now. The walls throbbed with an unnatural pulse, as if the very bones of the house were contracting, squeezing tighter, forcing me deeper into its insidious grasp. My heart hammered in my chest as the overwhelming scent of decay clogged my nostrils, pulling the air from my lungs. The oppressive weight of the house seemed to settle on my shoulders, and the floor beneath my feet creaked and groaned with each agonizing step I took. I turned back to look toward the hallway. It was an endless stretch of blackness, the walls warping and twisting like they were part of some living, breathing organism. The space between the walls grew narrower, the ceilings lower. The house was shrinking around me, folding in on itself as if it were a trap closing. My legs felt heavy, the pressure of the wood closing and almost unbearable. I could still hear the humming, that same maddening tune vibrating through my bones. But now it was something more, a beckoning, a command. It felt as though the very foundation of the house was singing it, chanting it, demanding that I follow its tune, that I surrender to its will. And despite every instinct screaming at me to run, I found my feet moving toward it. Not with choice, but with a compulsion. I didn't understand it. I should have been terrified. I should have been resisting. But I wasn't. Every step felt like it was pulling me in, dragging me closer to the source of that hum, to the thing that had been calling me since I first stepped foot in this godforsaken place. As I stumbled forward, the hallway stretched even further, more grotesque than before. The walls were no longer smooth. They were rough, jagged, like cracked bones, splintered and brittle. And then, in the distance, I saw it. A doorway. It beckoned me like a siren's call, the faintest light spilling out from its edges, glowing with an eerie, sickly hue. My pulse quickened, my body fighting to move faster, to reach it, to get to that door before I lost myself completely. But the moment I stepped forward, something changed. The ground beneath me cracked. A sharp, metallic sound rang through the air as the floorboards buckled and split open. The house seemed to breathe, a long, deep sigh that filled the room, as if exhaling a centuries-old secret. And then, from the cracks in the floor, the smell hit me full force. It wasn't just wood anymore. It was something far worse. Flesh. Rotting flesh. The scent of a corpse buried too long. Of something alive, feeding on itself, growing in the dark. I fell to my knees, gagging, gasping for air that felt thick and suffocating. The light in the room grew dimmer, the edges of the doorway now pulsating with an unnatural life. The walls around me seemed to warp into grotesque shapes, like faces contorted in agony, pressing through the rotting wood. I could see eyes, mouths, tongues, things that weren't supposed to be there. Faces that looked like they'd been buried for centuries, their mouths frozen in screams that echoed in my mind. And then the voice came. It was a whisper, soft and haunting, floating through the air like a specter. You can't escape. I looked up, my mind reeling, and saw it, standing in the doorway, a silhouette. But it wasn't just one thing. It was a crowd of them, hundreds, no, thousands of figures trapped in walls in the very wood, their forms twisted and contorted, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They were alive, but not alive. You're one of us now, the voice whispered again, and this time it was no longer a whisper. It was inside me. Inside my thoughts, the hum, the buzzing, the pressure, it all merged into one, a low, terrible sound that vibrated through my chest and into my soul. I could feel myself slipping away, my mind unraveling. The walls around me began to close in faster, squeezing tighter with every passing second. My heart raced. The air was thick, suffocating, but I didn't have the strength to scream. I couldn't fight it anymore. The house had won. I reached for the door, my fingers barely brushing the edges of the frame, but I knew it was pointless. I was too far gone. My vision blurred, and as I looked back, I saw the faces, those twisted, decaying faces, rushing toward me. They were coming from every direction, pressing against the walls, the floor, the ceiling, until there was nowhere to move, nowhere to breathe. And then the door opened, but it wasn't the way I had hoped. It wasn't salvation. The moment the door cracked open, the stench of rot intensified, filling my lungs with the sharp scent of decay. I saw nothing but blackness beyond the door, a black void, empty and cold. It wasn't an exit. It was the beginning of something else. You wanted to leave, a voice said, and this time I could feel it in my bones. But now you're part of the house. The floor beneath me gave way, and with a final scream, I was swallowed by the darkness. The house remained, its walls still humming. The sound of creaking would echo through the empty rooms as the house awaited its next victim. Those who came seeking answers, seeking to escape, it would claim them, just as it had claimed me. No one would hear me. No one would ever know. The house and the people inside it would remain trapped forever.